Hello, my friends. I got some video, some disturbing video from around the world, from Melbourne, from Montreal, and a crazy video even from Toronto, where a guy sort of forces his way into a women's bathroom in a club. You can see what the women say, but what does the man say? Just some crazy stuff. I talk about immigration and mass immigration. I want you to see it, though, not just hear it. So I'd like you to get a video version of this podcast. Go to rebelnewsplus.com, click subscribe. It's $8 a month. And you get the video version of the podcast and the satisfaction of keeping Rebel News strong, because we do not take government money, and it shows. Tonight, some thoughts on Canada's future and if it's too late to fight back. It's July 8th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you, you censorious thug.
I think I'm an optimist. I think I have to be. If you're a pessimist, what would be the point of fighting back? You would just retreat from every fight or hide or even surrender. One of the reasons I didn't leave Canada during the pandemic lockdowns was because I felt a solidarity with everyone else going through the same battles. Leaving Canada felt like the opposite of the phrase, the captain goes down with the ship. I know a lot of people who did move to Florida, for example, and elsewhere during the lockdowns. It was the crisis that jolted them out of their inertia. I recently went to a barbecue, and most of the people there were Canadians who have simply moved away. They come back to Canada for business reasons or family reasons, but they are building their lives and, more importantly, their families' futures in more promising lands. That's a very sad thing to say. But imagine how sad they must be to sever their roots here and replant those roots elsewhere. Those are pessimists, is my point. I was thinking the other day that the most important decision that my family ever made was 122 years ago, to leave Russia and come to Canada. Probably saved the entire family from whether it was the Russian Revolution or the Nazis. That was an epochal decision. Maybe the decision by these folks to leave Canada now will be regarded in the sweeping of time as just as important. I don't know. But I'm here. I also didn't leave because I felt a special duty to fight back. Most of the people I just referred to are business people or professionals. Their work is by definition apolitical. They're just about earning a living and providing for their family, and that's fair enough. That's very noble. Those are my duties too. But if you were to call me a businessman, which I suppose is part of what I do, my business is precisely that of independent journalism and public interest campaigns, including our largest campaign ever to fight against abusive government lockdowns and penalties during the COVID moral panic. As you know, we crowdfunded the Democracy Fund, a registered CRA charity, and it helped 3,000 people charged with insane COVID and lockdown offenses, including some famous cases like Tamara Leach and Arthur Pavlovsky and half a dozen churches. We're still fighting for the Amish community. My point is, it's tough to do that if you're not on the front lines. That's the Rebel News way. We do lots of commentary from our studios. That's what I'm doing right now. But our signature work and the stuff I personally love to do is something that makes us different from many others, is that we go out into the streets, sometimes at our peril. Antifa thugs are one risk for sure, basically the street gangs of the far left, but increasingly it's the police who would rather we not film certain things, including them. Here, watch what our Alexa Lavoie had to put up with the other day, simply recording a mass pro-Hamas protest outside the major cathedral in Montreal. They're pro-Hamas activists, and their crowning move every time is to have a massive prayer on the street outside the cathedral, blocking streets and sidewalks. There are 100 or so mosques in Montreal. This isn't about praying. This is about asserting dominance in the public square and showing who's the boss, and the police are happy to help. Take a look.
Je t'ordonne de circuler parce qu'en ce moment, si tu fais ça, je vais t'arrêter pour entendre.
Entendre de quoi?
Pour entendre.
Pour avoir fait mon Dieu, mon travail de journaliste?
Il est 17h28. t'es averti formellement. Si tu continues à créer la situation, ça va être un avantage.
Quelle situation? Parce que je fais mon travail de journaliste. T'as pas le droit de me toucher. T'as pas le droit de me toucher.
C'est un ordre, sinon je serais pas entrave. Fait que là, je vais te demander de circuler. L'ordre est donné. C'est ta décision à partir de maintenant.
Sérieusement, on se voit en cours. Je veux avoir ton badge number.
Il y a un arrêt pour ça, madame. Il y a un arrêt.
Je veux avoir ton badge number.
7737.
Toi aussi.
5169.
Votre nom, c'est?
Cyber.
Vous?
À l'air.
Alors, vous?
Secto. Allez.
Non, parce qu'on va te voir en cours, monsieur. Savez-vous que je suis en cours contre vous? Nous avoir refusé de nous protéger. D'avoir refusé de nous protéger, vous avez juste.
Allez sur le trottoir.
En ce moment, j'ai le droit d'être ici. C'est un lieu public. Et je suis ici. Je m'en fiche, messieurs. Vous ne protégez pas les journalistes. Et on l'a vu. Non, vous ne l'avez pas vu. Mais oui, vous m'avez empêché de faire mon travail de journaliste.
Non, tu fais très bien ton travail de là. T'as pas besoin d'être
parce que vous pensez que les prières de rue ne sont pas d'actualité, monsieur. En passant, là, en ce moment, il y a un projet de loi pour bannir ces prières de rue-là, monsieur.
On n'est pas sur la même longueur d'onde.
OK, vous êtes du côté des musulmans, des islamistes? Parfait, on le sait maintenant. On le savait. Monsieur, j'ai le droit d'être ici.
That sort of thing, by the way, I've seen a lot of that sort of thing around the world lately. Look at this from Melbourne, Australia, outside that city's major cathedral.
Yeah, a lot of them look bizarre. Yeah, it is.
Now, I'm told that was an Islamic holiday in a park near that cathedral, not necessarily an anti-Christian campaign, but then tell me, why were they surrounding the church like that? Imagine if the shoe were on the other foot. Now, that's in Melbourne, a city where in the past week, a Jewish synagogue was set on fire with 20 Jews inside of it, a synagogue, not an Israeli government or military target. It's just about getting the Jews. By the way, those Hamas terrorists and the tag-along Gaza civilians who entered Israel alongside the official terrorists on October 7th, 2023, when they raped and murdered Jews and live-streamed themselves doing it and made videos and phone calls home, they didn't talk about a new Palestinian country or a two-state solution or any particular political issue. They didn't even say the word Israel, really. They just talked about killing and raping Jews. Don't try to intellectualize what they did or whitewash it. They just loved murdering and raping Jews. That's what they said. But we don't need to look so far away. Here's a celebration in Windsor, Ontario, at a Canadian mosque. Here's how it's described online. Hezbollah loyalists gather at the Alul Bayt Mosque in Windsor, Ontario, to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussein by paying tribute to fallen Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of a designated terrorist entity in Canada. Watch the video. It's in a foreign language, of course. Here's the thing about the mass deportations in the U.S. that I mentioned yesterday. The vast majority of migrants to the U.S. are illegal because Joe Biden just made it that easy. They just walked across the border in a slow-motion invasion. Many were Mexican or from other places in Latin America, true, but of course many other foreigners realized that that was the way in. People from China, people from Iran, people from Arabia. Remember this guy?
By the way, if you are smart enough, you will know who I am. But you are really not smart enough to know who I am. But soon you're going to know who I am. Very easy.
Wow, very easy. The entitlement.
No, believe me, I'm much better than that.
The entitlement, guys. Wow.
You will see soon.
Yeah, that ain't a Spanish accent, if you were wondering. So the thing about the mass deportations in America is that they're scooping out illegals. It's really just a matter of logistics. The law is simple enough. Look at this.
The federal government is not leaving L.A. I don't work for Karen Bass. The federal government doesn't work for Karen Bass. We're going to be here till that mission's accomplished, as I said, and better get used to us now, because this is going to be normal very soon.
That's pretty awesome. That's part of a deportation army larger than most countries' armies. But what do you do in Canada when most of the pro-terrorist activists are either Canadian citizens who, white is the phrase I'm using, woke, white Canadians on the left, or citizens who immigrated here and were naturalized, came here through a legal process, maybe came 5 or 10 years ago under Trudeau or under Stephen Harper, with the least restrictive immigration process in the world. So you really don't need to sneak in. Trudeau and now Mark Carney will let anyone in. Here's a story from Blacklocks. Admit they never checked. That's the headline. The story says the Department of Immigration, in a briefing note, admits it never sought, quote, comprehensive security screening of suspected Egyptian terrorists arrested a year ago for plotting an attack on Toronto. Then Immigration Minister Mark Miller at the time defended his department's handling of the case, quote, security screening note. The application was not referred to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service or Canadian Border Services Agency for comprehensive security screenings, said the October 28 briefing note. Alleged terrorist immigration to Canada, quote, work permits linked to asylum claims are not typically assessed for admissibility. Do you get that? So they don't even Google these folks. Let me read just one more line. Egyptian national Ahmed El-Didi, 63, and his adult son Mustafa of Scarborough were arrested last July 28th by the RCMP on suspicion of plotting a serious violent attack at an undisclosed Toronto location. According to police, the pair remain in custody pending a 2026 trial on charges of terrorism, conspiracy to murder, possession of a weapon for dangerous purpose, and aggravated assault. I think we're at 5,000 people a day in Canada when you include temporary foreign workers and students and asylum seekers. They're not even Googling them. They're not even asking them. There's no in-person meetings anymore to come into Canada. You just click some words on a website. What happens when you bring in 2 million people a year, overwhelmingly from countries that are low-trust societies, and they're on the legal track, where our codes of honor and conduct they're just not held by these folks. Well, take a look at the ladies' room at a Toronto bar called Cabana the other day. Just take a look at this.
Then get out. Why are you talking about Let me Silva? Get the fuck out. Who are you? If I'm worthless, get out. You are right. Get the fuck out of the bathroom. Then go. You are right. Get the fuck out of the bathroom. Then go. I don't have to fucking leave. Get the fuck out of the bathroom. Leave on the fuck out of the fucking bathroom. Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck out. Keep going. Curious. Please go over there. You're ugly and you have a dick. You were in the woman's bathroom.
Yeah, that guy, he's not pretending to be transgender. He's not pretending at all. He's just forcing his way into the women's bathroom. And what are you going to do about it? Call the police? They'll arrest you for transphobia or maybe for racism. A low-trust man from a low-trust society comes to Canada and walks right into the women's bathroom. Do you think that's the first time he's done that? Do you think that's the only time he's done that? Do you think that's the limit of what he's done? What do you think he would have done if there was just one woman in there or one girl in there? See, in most of the world, a woman on her own is in danger. In most of the world. It was that way in the West centuries ago, too. But over time, we developed bonds and mutual promises, a culture, a set of laws, manners, a way of life. It took centuries to build a high-trust society where women can actually walk outside alone. They don't need to wear a burqa. They don't need to be under the protection of a guardian. And people from places in the world that are still barbaric are coming here and just tearing through us like a hot knife through butter. I'm worried about it because we have a government that knows this will win it for them. It'll ruin the country, but they can preside over those ruins. Every day this goes on gives them more votes and gives our side more chaos. You know, Pierre Poilievre did pretty well in the last election, but that's just a Canadian way of saying he lost. Even if he had won, he was still open to mass immigration, wasn't he? I don't think he's come right out and said what his limits are, has he? I say again, if Poilievre had run on two things, ending immigration and ending transgenderism, he'd be prime minister right now. But maybe it's too late for that now. What do you think? Stay with us for more. I think Canada is falling behind in terms of coming to its senses on transgenderism. All around the world, I think it was a mania, a moral panic, a kind of gaslighting that men can be women, and you have to call them trans women. You can't just say, well, that's a bloke, I can see it. All around the world, that is falling by the wayside, whether it's in the United Kingdom. Their highest court ruled that there are only two sexes, men and women. And in the United States, Donald Trump has brought in executive orders banning biological men from sports. And he's really taken it to those institutions that are defying him. He's not just letting his edict be an empty promise. But in Canada, things don't seem to be receding, at least not yet. Now, we know that the public is against transgender extremism. And Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith has taken some steps to have a fairly balanced policy. Of course, a judge overturned it, calling it unconstitutional. But what will it take for Canada to get on the right track? I think part of the answer is to know how out of step we are with our fellow democracies. And I don't know anyone who follows this file more closely than our next guest. She's been on it for years. In fact, she, along with Barbara Kay, published a book through Rebel News called Unsporting: How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport, ahead of her time. In fact, no other publisher in Canada would handle such a book. We were delighted to. Joining us now via Zoom from Hyderabad, India, is our friend Linda Blade. Linda, great to see you again. Thanks for coming on the show.
Really great to see you too, Ezra. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, things are very interesting. University of Pennsylvania, which is such a fancy school. It's not quite Harvard League, but it's up there. It's very reputable. It's got a huge endowment. It's regarded as a source of pride in the community. They were, I would say, ground zero for some of this madness. That's where this man called himself Leah Thomas, joined the women's swim team. He had his twig and berries, but he claimed he was a woman. He would insist on changing in the change rooms. It was so obviously abusive, but the entire administration was fine with it. It was only when some brave female swimmers stood up to it did that start to tumble. Tell us the story of University of Pennsylvania and how that story culminated just a week or two ago.
Well, it's quite a story, actually, Ezra. The 2022 NCAA championships in swimming, women's swimming, saw this man win, NCAA women's titles and exclude people like Riley Gaines and Paula Scanlon and so many women from their awards or from their rightful awards. And everybody knew the problem. Everybody could see it. And very few people back in 2022 dared to say anything. But that seemed to be the final straw for some of these young girls. They finally started to speak out. And as most of our viewers would know, Riley Gaines has gone on to being a highly recognized person across the United States, fighting very strongly for female-only sport. And finally, this past week, University of Pennsylvania signed the agreement with the Department of Education that, yes, they had violated Title IX. Yes, they would apologize to their female athletes. They would post it on their website that their sports heretofore will be female only in the women's category. It's a great victory for women's sports.
It's incredible that, really, other than, let's say, Harvard, this is as prestigious a place as it gets. And they were as adamant as possible. They went to bat for this man, quote, Leah Thomas, so hard. So for that, I'm not going to say it's a groveling, abject flip-flop, but actually I sort of think it is. To apologize to the women, to strip the men of their fake awards and medals, and to they basically apologized to women. It was as total as surrender as possible. Now, not a lot of Canadians know what the phrase Title IX means, and I'm not even sure if I have a total command of it. That's basically a legal promise in the United States that universities have to treat women's athletics this on the same terms as men's athletics. It was really designed to let women enter sports and to say to universities, you can't just support the men. Now, that was in terms of having a women's team in addition, like maybe it wasn't as lucrative, but really, if you're letting men beat up girls, you're violating Title IX. Do I get it? Did I understand it correctly?
Yes. It was a rule passed in 1972. And even I, as a Canadian athlete back in the 80s, was able to take advantage and have a full athletic scholarship to get my university degree out of the University of Maryland. It has helped so many women across the world and in the United States to obtain an education and to be able to compete at a higher level in collegiate athletics and then going on to even higher performances. So Title IX has really made an impact in the last 50 years. And I even credit Title IX for the emergence of the soccer moms in the 80s and 90s, all the women who care so much about sports and putting their kids in sport. It's led to women starting their own businesses. It's had a huge economic impact. And so for the woke to undermine Title IX in the way they have been doing in the last 10 years is disgusting. It's undermining everything about this culture in our society in the West. And it's really great. I'm very happy to see this turnaround.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I mean, I think Title IX, I think it's fair to say when it was made law some 50 years ago or so, you could call it feminist. I wouldn't say like radical feminist, but it was equality for both sexes. And like you say, it really unlocked a whole field of life for women. It made women's sports a career, a project, a hobby, a passion, an activity. Like it opened up a whole, and then for these elite universities, especially in these elite organizations, to then turn around on women and inject men into them. It reminds me of how these elite universities, who claim to be so progressive, often screen out Asian candidates from admission because the Asian kids do really well, just statistically speaking, on entrance exams. So you have universities like Harvard or Columbia that claim to be progressive on issues of race, actually discriminating against Asian Americans because they were smart. And you have these same progressive institutions actually discriminating against women. I just find it, the similarity I'm pointing to, Linda, is that these people claim to be the guardians of civil rights and the champions of minorities or women. And in fact, they were the undertakers who were destroying the rights in both cases. I'm delighted to see the pendulum swing back in the United States, though. Give me a quick survey of the scene in the U.S. Given that Trump signed that executive order so early in his term, and that he's following through with the different departments like the Department of Education, are there any holdouts in the United States? Are there any institutions or leagues or other things that are resisting a return to common sense?
There are holdouts. Every Democratic state is holding out. The Republican states protect kids in school, sports, and even in universities. And yet the Democratic states, run by obviously Democrat governors, are resisting this and are allowing boys and men to compete in women and girls sports in open defiance of the Trump executive order. And by the way, in defiance of the law, which is Title IX. And just this week on Monday, California rejected a letter from the Department of Education that is reprimanding California for allowing boys to compete against the girls. And it's been happening all spring. We've been watching it. And they just simply refuse, even though Governor Gavin Newsom on an interview admitted that it was grossly unfair to have a girl competing against a boy. And yet the state sort of bureaucracies continue to thumb their nose at the federal government in the United States just because.
That's very interesting. I didn't know there were so many holdouts. I'm not surprised. It's so ideological. It really is a leading edge issue for so many folks. But I think that ordinary people, I think it's got to be like 70% to 30% or 80% to 20%. People who just, there's different ways to talk about it. You can be sort of mean and angry, or you could say, guys, look, these are women and girls. They need their own space. Like, there's different ways to communicate this stuff. And I think the Riley Gaines of the world have been very smart about how they've done it. That image of Trump being surrounded by women and girls signing the executive order. I remember even J.K. Rowling commenting on it, like, how did the Democrats fumble an issue that so many mums and daughters, it's not I just don't know how these Democrat politicians can dig their heels in when they're against the will of the people and when they're against women and girls. I just think that's a strange political hill to die on. I don't know the stats in California. Is that state in support of boys and men entering women's sports, or is it just the politicians? Like, do you know if ordinary Californians are happy with transgenderism in sports, or are they like the other Americans?
They're like the other Americans at ground level, except that the leadership class is still very woke. They still want to hang on to gender identity ideology. They still want to promote it. And yet they're closing down their gender clinics for children. They're starting to understand that the public does not support. The public is, you're right, 80% in favor of female-only sex-based guidelines and eligibility in sports. And yet they keep going down this path. I think California even is showing signs at the ground level of turning red, turning Republican, because they're just getting tired of the Democrats not standing for anything reasonable. They've gone out of their minds, and people can't quite understand, like you say, how is this the hill to die on? So illogical.
There's a phrase that I first heard during the pandemic called mass formation psychosis. It almost, if I were to translate that into plain English, I would say sort of a mass hypnotic spell over people where they just sort of fell into a mania or something, peer pressure, conformity, or in other words, the boy who said the king's new clothes. That old story. I think it was an Aesop's fable about the, everyone said, "Look at the king in his lovely clothes," and it was a boy who said, the emperor has no clothes." I really think that for a while there, everyone was sort of gaslit into saying, yeah, that's a woman. And I think people are just shaking their heads and saying, what was I doing there? But how about up here in Canada? Because like I say, the UK, they've had inquiries. One's called the Cass report, the high court case. In the US, we've just done a bit of a survey from Trump's executive orders to the University of Pennsylvania. But Canada seems to be digging in as much as ever on this. Why is that? And again, I'm with you. I think ordinary Canadians are just like ordinary Californians, just like ordinary Pennsylvanians. I think ordinary people think this is nuts, but maybe we haven't snapped out of the emperor has new clothes mind control yet. I don't know. What's going on?
Well, I think at the national level, the entities controlling sport and funding sport, they seem to have intimidated the sports organizations into adopting this idea that people can compete in whatever category they feel like or they want, and that men can compete in women's sports, and we should all just be quiet and be accepting. But at the ground level, again, most people disagree with that. And thank goodness in Alberta, at the provincial level, at least Alberta has Bill 29 that passed in December of 2024, this past Christmas, that Danielle Smith she's working hard to protect the female category, and anybody accepting funding from the Alberta government, whether that's a school or sports organization, has to ensure that in every sport, there must be at least one category that is female only. Mm-hmm. There can be other categories, but there has to be a category that's female only.
Right. And it's my observation that trans athletes are not looking to participate in a trans category. They're not interested in going into an all genders bathroom. Their whole point, and I don't know if it's a psychological thing or a political thing or a sexual thing, they want to play on the women's team. They want to go in the women's change room. They're not interested in a trans league. It seems, at least I've never met a trans person who is. I think, but I think Danielle Smith is right on that, even though the courts are trying to undermine her. Let me ask you a question, because sometimes, because Canada is 1/10 or 1/9 the size of the United States, and we're so integrated with the U.S. I remember when I was in grade 8, we had an international band tour. We just went across the border into Montana, and you know, how many Canadians go on a school trip to the States? I think an enormous number, because so many of our cities are really close to the States. And how many Canadian sports leagues cross the border? I think quite a lot. And I'm not even talking about the very senior levels like the Olympics or whatever. So here's my question to you, Linda. Will the fact that so many U.S. sports leagues are coming back to gender sanity here, will that in some ways wash over Canadian sports, because Canadian teams that allow a man to play on them will not be able to do so when they do their trip across the border into Montana or Washington State or Oregon or New York or Maine or whatever? Will American decisions have a knock-on effect in Canada?
Yes, they will. And in Trump's executive order, they literally, part of that executive order is to work with Homeland Security in barring any male entering the United States with the intent to compete against female athletes. So if there is a male on the Canadian team, that team is going to have to drop that player. Wow.
And has that issue come up? Has there been a quarrel or a conflict? Has that, do you know if that's happened, if that's been enforced?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, well, that's very interesting. You know, Trump has, he's got good antenna. And I really think that he has managed to get a whole swath of support from people who probably wouldn't normally consider themselves Republicans, let alone Trump Republicans. And I think it's honest. I think he just looks at it with common sense and says, that's nuts. He is the boy who says the emperor has no clothes, and no one else will bring themselves to say it. It's quite incredible. Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic that this sanity, the pendulum is swinging back to sanity from insanity, or has this dug in so deeply it's impossible to eradicate? I think that transgenderism is so new that you can defeat the political ideology, but you're actually fighting in the trenches on this. Can it be weeded out?
Yes, but it has to definitely change at the top. And thank goodness the new president of the International Olympic Committee now has made a statement that she is at Coventry. She has actually said they are going to work to protect the female category. Now, we're not sure what that's going to look like, but I think she's responding to Trump's executive order again, because the next Olympics is going to be in Los Angeles.
Oh.
And so, you know, the stars are aligning, Ezra. And I think that there's going to be now a new consultation, a new sort of universal guidelines on athlete eligibility. Forget the transgender policy. Having a transgender policy in sport is like saying we're going to have a Jewish policy or a Muslim policy. No, we have to have a universal policy on athlete eligibility. It shouldn't matter what religion you are, what idea you have in your head. We have to have a sex-based universal policy on sport participation from the top to the grassroots. Yeah. That's the only way it's going to be fixed.
Well, I feel like I've learned an awful lot from you, and you're obviously deeply involved in this project. So thank you for the update. And you were so ahead of the curve yourself. I say again, your book is called Unsporting, How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sport. And I remember that book, packed with statistics. It's not just an editorial rant. It is a fact-based scientific analysis, which I really benefited from reading it. So thank you for publishing that. Linda, great to catch up with you. Thanks for taking the time zones into consideration to meet with us today. And hopefully when we talk again, we'll have more good news like the University of Pennsylvania apology. More news, good news to talk about.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it, Ezra, and thank you for supporting the book as well and for publishing it. Nobody else would.
Well, it's our pleasure, and you were a prophet. And it's a delight to see your prophecies come true in a good way. So, that doesn't always happen, that a prophet is recognized in their time. So thank you, Linda. Great to catch up with you.
Thank you very much.
All right, there she is, Linda Blade, an author, activist, and of course, someone who has spent her life in women's sport. Stay with us, more ahead. Hey, welcome back. Your letters to me. On my monologue, Paul Schofield commented, the American left had better be careful for what they wish for. As Ezra mentioned, their moment, rather than a George Floyd summer of violence, they may get something more akin to General Sherman's march to the sea. Well, I tell you, it's very exciting to see how confident and bold the ICE team is. And they have to look very butch like that and be well armored like that because, partly, I suppose, because the people they're deporting sometimes are murderers or gang members, but because there are Antifa rioters on the streets, left-wing white people who want to keep their demographic transformation project alive. Next letter is from G Canada 3005. On my interview with Fatima Gunning, why can't Canadians show the same national pride? This is something I think about a lot. I think one of the things that is motivating Ireland to push back against mass immigration is, first of all, it's happening so stunningly quickly. Second of all, it's a small country which has a small town feeling, not Dublin, it's a big city, but the rest of it, they really know their neighbors. It's like a step back in time in a good way. And in a high-trust society, people look out for each other. You could say it's a nosy way of living. Everyone knows everybody else's business. It's like going to a small school. You maybe are in a rut that you don't like, but everyone has their place. In Canada, we're too atomized, especially in the big cities, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton. A lot of that community cohesion is gone, so terrible things can happen, and who's going to say anything about it? In Northern Ireland, where there were actually riots a few weeks ago because some migrants allegedly raped a girl, the whole community came out, mums and dads too, because they felt they knew those families, and the migrants were new intruders. I don't know if we have that same family spirit in Canada. We don't have the same ethnic solidarity either. There is an Irish ethnicity. It's the Indigenous people of that place. I'm not sure if that bond exists in Canada. There is a Canadian culture. I just don't know if it's cohesive enough and protective enough to stop the mass immigration that's coming. We'll see in the months and years ahead, I guess. It's our show for today. Until next time, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.